Hello. 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 Is Gayatri there?
Yes, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Gar.
Okay. Yeah, just a minute. I will talk to you later, Gayatri. Okay. When I ask you, then you start your.
Sure,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mr. Don, have you joined?
Yes,
Hello,
sir,
Mr.
I'm
Don.
here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Actually, I hope it is not inconvenient to you.
No, sir, no. Thank you. It's a true pleasure to be here, and I'm really honored for the invitation. Thank you.
So that is there, but I thought the time zone a little difficult problems for the people
No,
in.
it's fine, sir. It's fine. It's just 2 hours, 30 minutes difference. It's
Yeah.
fine.
Okay. Because I have guests from China, from Japan. So I mean, they are little late by 2-3 hours.
Yes,
And
yes.
in Australia, it is almost midnight. So
That's
really,
true.
I just feel very hesitant to ask them for such a. Our problem is that there are some students from abroad, from
Right, right.
Iran, Pakistan. So we have to keep that also in mind. And there are certain working
Yes.
professionals also. I mean, who are
That's
free
how,
after
that's
5.
true.
So with all that, I have to request my distinguished guests to spare time. Now, before we begin, I would like to ask one of our interns, Gayatri, to welcome you on behalf of Foreign Policy School. Yes, Gayatri, go on.
Hello, and welcome to the online certificate course on Indian Foreign Policy and the Foreign Policy School, a FPRC initiative. I am Gayatri Dandekar, having done BA History with Politics and Sociology from Ferguson College, Pune, and an intern of the FPRC Online Foreign Policy School, New Delhi. We are honored to have you with us today, Mr. Don McLain Gill. He is a Manila-based geopolitical analyst and author who specializes in Indo-Pacific affairs, Indian and Philippine foreign policy, and India's Southeast Asian relations. He currently has over 100 publications to his credit, and he has written in the form of books, peer-reviewed international journal articles, book chapters, newspaper columns, and commentary analysis articles for top publishers such as The Diplomat, The National Interest, Asia Times, South China Morning Post, Observer Research Foundation, East West Center, RUSI, and the Stimson Center, among others. His latest article is Opportunity Opens Up for India to Regain Influence in South Asia in The Diplomat, dated August 8, 2022. He is also regularly interviewed by international news TV channels on a wide array of issues regarding Asian affairs, South and Southeast Asian geopolitics, and Philippine foreign policy. His experience includes presently being a fellow, International Development and Security Cooperation, IDSC, full-time since February 2021. Previously, he was an analyst at Prelia. Prior to that, he was director, Middle East Studies Association, Philippines. We are honored to have you with us today, sir. We look forward to learning from your experience. Now, I would like to hand over the proceedings to Professor Mahendra Gaur, Director, FPRC, New Delhi.
Thank you, Gayatri, for a wonderful job. Now I will, you can switch off your video. And
Okay.
now I will have our chief guest today's session. Gayatri, mute your video.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So now I think I can talk to our guest directly. Hello, Mr. Don. I hope you are there.
Good evening, Dr. Gaur. It's a pleasure to be here and to meet you virtually.
Okay. And would you like a PPT or would you like to read your lecture?
I will be delivering it as a talk, Dr. Gaur. So, just to make it interactive as well. So I'll just be discussing it in a form of a discussion or talk.
No, that is there. I mean, we have a solution for both the formats. Shall I think I should make you the host. So in case it is required, you can do it because that is more convenient to the guest. If we make him the host, you can do your, address, and when it is over, then we will start the question answer session. Okay.
Okay, absolutely, sir. Thank you.
So I think I can ask you to begin the proceedings. And before that, I would like to welcome you on behalf of FPRC and Foreign Policy School for sparing time. I know you are a busy person, 24/7, very much in demand throughout the world. And we are happy to note it. I've noted it from your activity, your resume and all that, because I keep a
Thank you
track
so
of
much.
all the distinguished people who are working on areas which are very vital to Indian foreign policy. So now please go ahead with your address. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mahindra Gaur, and of course, the Foreign Policy Research Center for conducting such an important event to really spearhead discussions on India-Southeast Asian relations, which of course forms as a vital component of not only India's Act East policy, but its overall foreign policy framework with regards to, of course, its role as an emerging power and as an emerging great power. Now, before jumping into the meat of the discussion, of course, we'd like to set the parameters in terms of a theoretical analysis. As students of international relations, students of foreign policy, it is necessary to set a theoretical lens in order to understand the evolving relationship between India and Southeast Asia. And I think this is what we all need to understand in order to theorize or to analyze this particular setup more thoroughly. So two of the most important variables that I'd like to introduce, particularly in terms of understanding the dynamic relationship between India and Southeast Asia, is that of power and perception. We could not decipher India-Southeast Asian relations without taking into context other states and other regions involved, given, of course, the interdependent nature of the international system. So understanding the evolution of relations between India and most of Southeast Asian states requires a practical theoretical lens for foreign policy analysis that can really incorporate as much of the dynamicism that has been taking place within the relationship. So if you look into the dominant theories, particularly that of systemic theories, such as structural realism, which really aims to box states in terms of black boxes, it really does not capture the dynamicism and the flexibility and the evolution, of course, of the relationship between India and Southeast Asia. The constructivist turn that took place in international relations post-Cold War is also something that is seen as an alternative, of course, to the dominant rational approaches. However, this really fails to take into consideration, of course, the problem of future uncertainty and, of course, the role of the anarchic system. So hence I introduce, of course, the importance of neoclassical realism, really, and understanding the complexities involved in terms of foreign policy analysis. So we could understand neoclassical realism, of course, just a brief overview of having three variables. The independent variable is, of course, the preponderance of the international material distribution of power. The intervening variable would be that of the perceptions of leaders of states, domestic, really. And the dependent variable would be the shifts in foreign policy. So with that in mind, I think it's now time for us to go into the crux of the discussion, really to talk about the evolution of India-Southeast Asian relations, the challenges and opportunities that are also part of this particular situation. So I'd like to categorize four independent phases that really tried to shape the overall structure of India-Southeast Asian relations. Though these are not exclusive and these are not the only phases that you could, of course, look into. But of course, this is something that I consider to be of vital interest based on my analysis of the situation. So the first phase really is the Cold War, the Cold War period. The second phase, I look into the post 9/11 era. The third phase would be the Act East policy. And the fourth phase would be the Indo-Pacific construct, the rise of the Indo-Pacific construct. Now, we look into the first phase, which is the Cold War. We understand it based on the structural perspective of the bipolar order. Now, during this particular period, post-independence 1947, India really adhered to the principles of non-alignment, as all of you are aware. And this was perceived by Washington as being anti-US. So we have to understand that looking at the structural level, we look into the United States and the USSR during that time, and really based on our understanding on the complexities of India-Southeast Asian relations. So going back to what I was saying, India's adherence of the non-alignment movement, the non-aligned movement, though it was not particularly anti-West or anti-Soviet Union, ironically, it was to avoid getting involved, of course, in the power politics of that time between the great powers of the time. However, the United States had this perception that because India was not explicitly with it, in terms of course, its engagements and, of course, its strategy to contain the Soviet Union, it is then perceived to be anti-West or anti-United States. So this really soured the relations between India and the United States during that particular period. And of course, the United States' proximity towards Pakistan, the normalization of relations with the PRC, who has indulged in a border war with India in 1962 onwards, as we can see that these engagements of the United States did not really bode well for India. And of course, the establishment of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations in 1967, was received with a lack of enthusiasm by New Delhi. As we can see that members of ASEAN themselves, like the Philippines and Thailand, which were part of the Security Pact, SEATO, with the United States as a form of anti-communist bloc security alliance, we could see Pakistan's involvement in SEATO as well, which then further catalyzed a more negative perception towards ASEAN as a pawn of the United States in the great power competition, and of course the incorporation of Pakistan, and of course normalizing relations with China. As we can see, these structural factors have really impacted on the level of mistrust between India and Southeast Asian states. And of course, in 1971, the Indo-Pak War, and of course, the liberation of Bangladesh also figured in, where the United States and the West overtly supported Pakistan despite the genocide. And of course, we can see the role of the Soviet Union, and of course, aiding India's desire to really liberate those that were oppressed during the time in East Pakistan. So of course, these are the things that we have to take into consideration. Now, though there was really no problem directly between India and Southeast Asian states, but the structural motivations and the constraints really pulled Southeast Asian states away and created that level of mistrust between India and Southeast Asia, perhaps with the exception of Vietnam, was also North Vietnam also doing relatively well in terms of its relations with the Soviet Union. So perhaps with that exemption, but the rest of Southeast Asia really did not create that level of engagement with India. And of course, Indonesia, who was also part of the non-aligned movement. But if we look into the totality of maritime Southeast Asia and a significant part of landlocked Southeast Asia, we can see that this is the typical factor that we have considered in terms of the relationship between India and Southeast Asia. So again, going back to the theoretical lens, the importance of understanding the structural dynamics and of course the perception of states helps us understand the complexities involved between India and Southeast Asia during that time, despite the fact that there was really no direct conflict or direct issues between India and various Southeast Asian states. Now, at the end of the Cold War, of course, in the 1990s, with the liberalization, of course, of our economy in India and of course spearheading the Look East policy under Prime Minister Narasimha Rao, we could definitely see that there was that level of motivation to go beyond the perceptions of the Cold War. However, while the Look East policy was often seen as a pivotal component, we have to understand that it was not enough to really solidify the relations between India and Southeast Asia, primarily because India was not in the great position as it is now international in terms of the distribution of power. India was barely bouncing back in terms of economy. Its diplomatic networks had to have some recalibrations with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And of course, the Soviet bloc, also with its dissolution and the liberalization, moving towards Western Europe, all these systemic attributes really created delays in terms of India's ability to really harness its potential in the international system. Now, understanding this particular period, throughout the post-Cold War era, there has already been an improvement of relationships with between the United States and India, even after the nuclear tests under Prime Minister Vajpayee. There has also been an attempt by Japan, other US allies, to really welcome India's role in the international system as a fellow democratic force. Now, understanding it from the structural perspective again, the dissolution of the Soviet Union, a major thorn in US-India relationship, and India's rising economic capacity led to a change in perception within Washington in order to maximize close ties with India and in order to tap, of course, the growing wealthy Indian American diaspora and bolster US security network in Asia. So as we can see, these were the incentives that really catalyzed stronger relations between India and Southeast Asian states, or rather India and the United States. Now, we go back to the Look East policy. The Look East policy of the 1990s was also supported by the United States. In fact, it was post-1990 that India gained its full dialogue partnership with ASEAN in 1995, became a member of the ARF in 1996. And this was a significant factor that really motivated the positivity of ties between India and Southeast Asia. However, because of the domestic constraints in India, it was not really able to maximize or leverage on its Look East policy with regards to the value added towards Southeast Asian states. So examples of which was, Malaysia's hope for big infrastructural projects with India did not push through. Singapore's attempt to modernize projects for India's civil aviation system infrastructure, it did not really go according to plan. And of course, Thailand's interest to really harness other potential areas of convergence with India did not also go into plan because of the limit in terms of domestic capabilities of India. And of course, China, being the leading player in the East and Southeast Asian region during that time, did not really want an interference from any extra regional state. And in fact, during that period, it sort of shunned India's role, downplaying it to a significant degree because of these domestic constraints that India faced. However, as we can see, because of the disastrous terrorist attack of 9/11, and of course, the series of terrorist attacks that came after that, we could see that this became a significant catalyst to really draw India in terms of the security architecture of Southeast Asia, and not only Southeast Asia, but the rest of the Asian continent as well. So the post 9/11 period saw a series of terrorist activities that spread throughout the continent. And the global war on terror administered by President Bush opened doors for India to enhance its cooperation with Southeast Asian states and really close the gap further in terms of misunderstanding and misconception. So before 9/11, in fact, an interesting thing is that India's call and warning for the spread of terrorism, these were not really taken seriously by the West initially before 9/11. And after that disastrous moment, that really pointed out that not even the most powerful state in the world materially speaking, can really deflect effectively the negative forces of terrorism alone, really brought India into the picture. In fact, in 2002 and 2003, the Indian Navy escorted U.S. ships transiting through the Malacca Strait, which is a pirate swarm. And we could really see, of course, to the surprise of many, that the US reaffirmed India's role not only in the Indian Ocean region, but also in the Western Pacific, and urged states to really perceive India's growing role positively. And there has been a greater acceptance, of course, of India's role in Southeast Asia and the Southeast Asian security architecture. In fact, the mutual desire to fight terrorism has also brought Southeast Asia and India closer. And in fact, after 9/11, Southeast Asian countries started seeing India's contributions in a more positive light. Southeast Asian states like Singapore, like Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam particularly, they all welcome India to play a bigger role in the region regarding issues of not only terrorism and piracy, but towards other traditional security issues and non-traditional security issues. As we can see, India's role in the Indian Ocean in terms of being the first responder to any humanitarian disaster was also seen as a best practice that India can incorporate regarding the Western Pacific Ocean vis-a-vis its role as a security provider. But then during this particular period, going beyond the structural forces of the United States and the Soviet Union, it is important to look into the structural role of the United States and China, two of the most important heavyweights for Southeast Asian states, arguably up to this very point, where Southeast Asian states are locked within the power competition of the United States and China. So, the section on India's Look East policy really acknowledges India's stakes in the Pacific. However, it's interesting that China released a blue book in 2013. It wasn't by the government, but it was by a think tank that is also connected with the government that really emphasized China's role in the Indian Ocean. And it was quite clever for China to really point on India's Look East policy as an excuse to be able to increase its presence in the Indian Ocean. However, the difference is that India seeks to work within the established order, while China seeks to, of course, revise the established order based on its interests and really to exclude the established order devised by the United States in the post-Second World War. So as we can see, there is a competition of perception in line with the rise of material capability. So we'll put China aside for a minute, and we could look into that later on for the third and fourth phase. But really, during the post-9/11 period, there was a significant increase in engagement between India and Southeast Asia. In fact, in 2005 to 2007, India's trade with Singapore grew by 31%. Malaysia grew by 3.5 billion, and Indonesia also increased by 44%. Thailand also increased significantly. Vietnam increased by around 40% between 2006 and 2007. And Myanmar also increased a significant 44% increase. So as we can see, states in Southeast Asia began really harnessing India's potential, of course, as a development partner and a security provider, despite, of course, attempts by China to block India's involvement in the East Asia Summit, for example. China and Malaysia, for that matter, sought to, in the earlier stages before 2005, sought to block India's position and its enrollment into the EAS. However, this did not go up to plan, considering that there were also several Southeast Asian states that really wanted India to be part of the architecture economically and security-wise. So, we can see that this is a significant level of a more positive and more accepted role of India as a security provider and, of course, a development partner. And of course, we have to understand that in the post-2008 era, after the significant financial crisis in the West, we could see that China's economy wasn't as impacted compared to the United States and Europe. And this led it to have that confidence to be able to, of course, promote itself as the new engine of growth in Southeast Asia. And this has also led parallelly to more assertiveness in the South China Sea and the East China Sea, to be able to project power and really to fuel its global ambitions beyond Southeast Asia. So this is something that we need to take into consideration towards the third phase, which is the promulgation of India's Act East policy of 2014. So we could look into the situation in 2014, post 2014. This coincided with the following structural components. So first of all, China's increasing assertiveness in the region, coupled by its increase in material capability, military strength, economy, name it, you got it. And of course, it also converged with the intensifying US-China power competition. Now, the US-China power competition, of course, is something that is a defining factor in up to today's time. And in fact, the need to really look into this is necessary to be able to really understand the structural components of bilateral and regional relationships. So going back to the components, aside from the US-China power competition, it also led to an increasing noteworthy level of rise in India's material capabilities. In fact, India's economy, its GDP, its military capabilities, its diplomatic networks were much, much stronger than how it was in the 1990s at the time of the Look East policy. So India was really at that point where it was able to leverage and of course project itself as a significant leader of Asia, an Asian power, a major power, and a democratic force that seeks to work within the liberal order or the democratic rules-based order. So it is evident that as material capabilities of states grow, the scope of their engagements will also expand. So India has expanded its engagements to the East Asian region, to the Southeast Asian region, to the Western Pacific, just as China has intensified its engagements to its southwest, the Indian Ocean region. However, as I've mentioned earlier, the differences in perception between China and India regarding their growth and towards the established order really brings about changes. So it's not really just the material capability, but really how they perceive the international environment. India wanted to present itself as a responsible stakeholder of the order, of the established order, a rising major power, and of course, a responsible security provider. But China, on the other hand, as we can see, China seeks to revise the very order that India seeks to work in. And as it expands towards India's geographic locus of power, it is evident that both states will also engage in what I call a power competition. You know, China has significantly expanded its naval capacity after 2008 towards the Indian Ocean, and even forged closer partnerships with states of Southeast Asia, such as Pakistan and even Bangladesh. And as we can see, China's rapidly expanding BRI investments in key South Asian countries was also a cause of concern. Now, in the past, India's relations with Southeast Asian states really lacked the momentum, particularly in the security realm, in part due to China's concerns. But you know, as we can see, based on the structural levels of engagement, we can see that China's assertiveness has also become of worrying concern, even for Southeast Asian states that once perceived it to be the best source of economic growth. And in fact, you know, as we can see 2 decades ago, despite the willingness of Southeast Asian states to have India play a bigger role in the region, India showed reluctance forging security relations with its Southeast Asian partners because of its resource limitations as well. And of course, the decision-making was also recalibrated during that period. So in fact, you know, as we can see, the Act East policy was really a much needed phase in terms of India's outreach to Southeast Asia. As we can see, you know, India's earlier attempts, you know, was also disregarded by China. But at the same time, as India continues to grow and as it continues to proactively engage with Southeast Asian states, we can see that China has also been concerned that India has also been engaging, of course, within its immediate periphery. And while the perceptions may be different, the rational calculations of states also allow it to think for the worst case scenario in terms of the future intentions of states. So this has led to more friction between India and China, and of course, China and the United States. So Prime Minister Modi's Act East policy provides an important multidimensional framework for India to engage actively with its neighbors in Southeast Asia, especially on the strategic level, which was not entirely emphasized during the Look East. So by forging closer strategic relations with Southeast Asian states, India is now slowly establishing itself as a more formidable and practical counterweight to China, though not entirely in terms of material capability, as China still has the upper hand quantitatively in terms of providing value or resources to Southeast Asian states. But the strategic importance of India within the strategic calculations of Southeast Asian states has significantly increased based on how it was 2 decades ago. Given India's lack of vested territorial interests, no revisionist interests in the region, India has projected itself as a responsible rising power. So there has been stronger support in Southeast Asia towards India's role. Now, if we compare to China's role in the Indian Ocean, we could see that China's engagement is not solely for development or to project itself as a responsible stakeholder, but really to constrain India's influence as well, given, of course, its global ambitions. And as we can see, South Asian states have also been backtracking on the BRI, as we can see crisis after crisis. Sri Lanka, as we all know, and now Pakistan and Nepal are also going down the line. Its other significant partner, Laos, in Southeast Asia, is also facing a significant dilemma. African states are also pushing back. So because of this reluctance, the lack of transparency, and of course the politically motivated engagements, even China's influence in these areas have also been limited or have been limiting. So this is the perfect opportunity to really see the difference between India's role in Southeast Asia and China's role in the Indian Ocean as well, and how states in these regions perceive each other in terms of perception. So going to the last phase, where then we can answer some questions, particularly if you would like to discuss anything, I'd be happy to to indulge in these conversations. We go to the rise of the Indo-Pacific. This is a relatively new phenomenon with the change of with the promulgation of the Indo-Pacific Command under President Trump. The Indo-Pacific as a geographic space is not new. The Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean as one strategic region was even present in the post-1800s. And major powers during those times have also harnessed that level of geographic complexity. However, the Indo-Pacific as a construct, in terms of terminology, in terms of conceptual understanding and underpinnings, these are all relatively new. And this is also another point that we have to notice, is that the Indo-Pacific is also a sign that the United States has realized that it cannot preserve the rules-based order alone, and it would need to tap major powers such as India, Japan, and Australia to really engage based on maintaining the rules-based order at a time when US influence has also been faced with a lot of ambivalence, particularly as we can see recently, the messy withdrawal from Afghanistan, the preoccupation away from Asia towards Ukraine, and the way the United States has really jumped in to really let Ukraine fight till the last Ukrainian, despite the reassurances, has also created problems for Southeast Asian states. And it is within this particular setting, and in fact in Southeast Asia, countries like Cambodia and Laos have also fallen deeper into the orbit of China. It is slowly pushing back on the United States. In fact, Cambodia has also allowed China to really use its strategic port, and at the same time, a military-to-military, army-to-army agreement between China and Cambodia also signified this particular shift. So, it's not really doing any favors for the U.S. influence in the Indo-Pacific. So, and coupled with a more assertive China that is also pushing for a revised order based on a global security initiative, we can see that the problem is rising for the United States. And it is through major powers like India, where the maintenance of the rules-based order can be seen as a significant hope. With India, with Japan, with Australia, all these countries, you can include France as well as an Indo-Pacific power. This construct has also allowed a bigger role by countries like India, not only in the Indian Ocean, but also in the Pacific as well. And this has also been accepted widely by Southeast Asian states. And in fact, India now, as it continues to rise, it is now the fifth largest economy in terms of GDP. It is the fourth in terms of military power projection. It is the second most populous, turning first. These are significant factors that really incorporate India's leadership role. And this has also been perceived positively by Southeast Asian states. In fact, the sale of the BrahMos missile happened right here in the Philippines, early 2022. And in fact, the Philippines continues to seek more Indian assistance and, of course, a bigger role as a security provider in terms of other areas of defense cooperation. And in fact, Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, Cambodia, all these states have also emphasized their willingness for India to play a more proactive and a bigger role. Because as India continues to rise, it would provide more alternatives to these developing countries to really have a middle way amid the US-China power competition. No Southeast Asian state wants to draw themselves deeper in the US-China competition. And the acknowledgement of India's strategic autonomy, which is the role that India wants to project of not being involved in bloc politics, but really the level of cooperation should be based on mutual interests and concerns, is something that is very fashionable for Southeast Asian states. And as we can see, the engagements are continuing to blossom. So based on the particular trends that we are facing now, we can definitely say that India's role, as it continues to rise, as it continues to adhere with its principles, strategic autonomy, and of course, the preservation of the rules-based order, we can definitely see that the trend for India-Southeast Asian relations will continue to improve. And this is a positive sign for all of us to be able to play a bigger role in terms of defense, economic, people-to-people, cultural ties between India and Southeast Asian states. So I'd like to end my discussion there. I hope I didn't take too much of your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Don. I mean, it has been a wonderful and comprehensive coverage of all the major developments so far as India's role in having good relations with the Southeast Asian countries. They are traditional, historic. We had cultural relations with these countries, and that is the foundation of this relationship. And now the strategic issues have come up because of major power rivalries, and I will take up those issues later. Now I open the house for question answer session, and I will ask the interns to put your questions in a clear and simple manner, and don't delay too much. So now you will start asking questions.
So may I ask my question?
Yeah, go on.
Good evening, sir. I'm Gaurav. I'm currently a student of political science from the University of Delhi. And my question to you is that while talking about India, Southeast Asian region, the entire geopolitics of the region, can we say that basically India is now at this point of time the major player and the hegemon of the entire global south as of now? It is a very powerful statement to make, but can we say that we have reached that level of diplomacy that India is now the hegemon of the entire region, and how can India play a role in collaborating with the other 10 basic Southeast Asian nations, whether they are ASEAN nations, as a matter of fact. And since there are challenges of physical connectivity as well as economic imbalances that are there, as well as as well as China's presence, how can India collaborate with all of them and become a very major player in the entire region?
Thank you for your question, Gaurav. And in fact, these are, it's in fact a very important question. You talked about hegemony in the global south. If you look into Indian strategic thought, we tend to veer away from the term hegemony because, of course, of its connotations. But India has become a leader. There's no question about that with regards to the global south, because it understands the dilemma of the developing world and of course incorporates itself within this particular structure. In fact, you look into Africa, you look into other parts of Asia, they look to India as a model of development. They don't look to China, they don't look to the United States as a model for development. They look at India. And this is significant because this allows us to project soft power as well, and not only hard power. Though we still have a lot of work to do in terms of really reaching that level of prominence in terms of influence as well in the global south, given that this is a sort of card China seeks to play as well, that it is a leader for the developing world, which is why this has spearheaded the BRI for that matter. And the US is trying to really counter that by saying, no, I'm also here for the developing world. And we can see a number of agreements, a number of frameworks, economic frameworks, year after year, meeting after meeting by the US and the G7 that really didn't materialize. So in order to be to reach that level of prominence for India, we need to understand what we need to do in an asymmetric fashion towards the BRI. The BRI now is very much the dominant figure in terms of development assistance in the developing world. And despite its flaws, there has still been no significant counterweight or alternative long-term for the BRI. And this is where we can play a part. See, India and Japan had the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor in the past, but it did not kick off significantly. So we need to really focus on the need to really coordinate with our like-minded partners for something long-term. We cannot beat the BRI in a project-for-project basis. That would be a futile attempt. We need to look at it asymmetrically. What does the BRI not offer that would be to the development of the developing world? This is where we go in. And then automatically we can transition to other projects as well as we gain traction in terms of acceptance in the developing world. But nonetheless, India is a prominent leader in the global south in terms of development. And just very briefly towards your last question, the geopolitical landscape is very complex, given, of course, that we are headed towards multipolarity. It's not as simple as a bipolar world or a unipolar world anymore. And India is emerging as a significant pole in the multipolar era. But really the need to show developing countries that, to side with the power does not mean that you would have to be involved in power competition. Serve as the middle way alternative, as I've always said, that would really draw these developing countries out of the US-China power competition. So, these are the areas that we have to work on as we continue to grow. Our capacity may not be as significant as China's in terms of providing resources, but nonetheless, our role has been quite established, not only in Asia, but in the rest of the world. And we must continue to work on this.
Thank you, sir.
Next question.
Hello, sir.
Yes, go on.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
This is Gayatri. I wanted to ask you about the US-led Bring Back Better World B3W initiative and BRI. My question is, why is B3W not as successful as BRI? And what do you think are the reasons for that? I would like to know about this.
Right, thank you. And that is a very important question. In fact, I've written an article exactly about this for the East-West Center sometimes back. You could check that out as well for in detail. But just to provide a concise explanation is that, the Build Back Better world was ambitious. It is not the first, but it is among many frameworks done by the West to really counteract with the BRI. However, because of domestic constraints, the inability to provide resources, to gather funds, and of course, the political coordination between the members to really provide it in the international level really stalled the program. And in fact, even the IPF or other initiatives are also looked at with uncertainty because of the problem. They've released another framework after the G7 meeting, their most recent one, with $60 billion, if I'm not mistaken, but really there's still no official coordination as to where they'd get the funds. And it's because of this problem that such initiatives really barely get off the ground. China has been, you know how it is with China. It's a one-party system. There's really no domestic constraint. They have deep pockets. They tend to use that. But the problem is they use it also for their own narrow-ended goals. But because there is still no robust alternative, developing countries are stuck with the BRI. So until the liberal order gets their side together and really find something robust and long term, then that's the only time we could find an effective counterweight. Other than that, it's going to be really hard because the expectations are going lower and lower. The legitimacy of such frameworks are also going lower and lower. So the chances are they will just be ignored. So that's a problem. We do not want to reach that level of low legitimacy for a framework for the BRI counterweight. So, proper understanding with coordination must be done.
Do you think it can be as dangerous as what happened in Sri Lanka
Which one in particular?
regarding Hambantota or like just Chinese debt trap diplomacy?
Right. That's one thing because if you look into Pakistan, for example, what's happening now, 30% are 30% of its debt, it's for China, and in fact, even 10% was attributed in Sri Lanka. There are scholars within Sri Lanka that say that it could be even more than 20%. Because of the lack of transparency when it comes to China's engagements with political leaders, the problem of corruption,
Yeah.
etc. This also creates problems for the people. And the people, as you've seen in Sri Lanka, have been pushing back. India has amounted with a significant role. In fact, it has given significant billions to Sri Lanka's development. As we can see, India's role really in providing is not politically motivated. It's not for politicians to really feast on, but it's people-centric. That's what makes it really attractive. So India has gained the hearts of people in Afghanistan, in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, Nepal, while China has gained the traction of politicians in power. That's a difference. So that's why China has a bigger edge. But if we're talking about the quality, well, you know that for a matter of fact.
Yeah. Do you think that a people-centric approach is more beneficial in the long term?
It's going to be beneficial in the long term, but the need to also harness that political level, because it is the political level that really allows investments to be made, partnerships to be made. We've seen India and Japan being kicked off in Sri Lanka and transferred to another terminal. Similar things may happen again if India does not gain the that level of coordination with its neighbors. So the need to work both politically and with a people-centric approach is necessary. And that's, I think, what India can do. And I think it's a great opportunity for India now to leverage on this.
Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, the next question. Come on, be quick.
Good evening, sir. I am Riya Sharma and I'm currently pursuing my master's in political science. Sir, my question is that during the Cold War, both the superpowers, that is the US and the USSR, fought for influence in Southeast Asia. And even today, we see Southeast Asia as a battleground in the US-China rivalry. So, sir, don't you think that in both the situations, Southeast Asia, in fact, largely the whole of South Asia, has been compelled to choose sides despite the fact that we are going to suffer either ways. And so don't you think that it's high time that South Asia itself realizes its geopolitical significance, overcome its problem of being the least connected region in the world, and live up to the so-called Asian century?
That's absolutely right. And thank you for that question. If we have to understand, it is a developing world that is suffering in terms of the power competition. We look into the West sanctions on Russia. It's not Russia that's being affected, it's a developing world. We look into the US-China power competition. It's really not affecting them as much as it is affecting the developing world in terms of needing to choose a side and then facing the consequences of choosing a particular side. So this is the reality of the international system in which we live in. It is not solely dictated by realpolitik, but still realpolitik maintains its preeminence in interstate engagement. So the necessity for countries that share common ideologies and goals for development, the need for them to really gain that level of credibility in the international system is necessary. But in terms of the cycle of power competition, it is unfortunate that the developing world continues to serve as collateral for the interests of the select few. So this is a reality in which we live on. And in the second part of your question for South Asia, it is right. I've written about this before as well, that South Asia, despite all the necessary ingredients for a harmonious intra-regional cooperative framework, still is the least integrated region in the world. And this is primarily because particular states in Southeast Asia have led to that level of dependency towards external factors as well. And there are also other administrative issues and critical issues, such as the lack of a comparative advantage, the low level of infrastructure, etc., or the tariffs and the non-tariff barriers, and of course the special list that we call. These are the administrative factors, but there's also the political factor, which is the lack of mistrust and the overdependence on extra-regional states. This continues to plague the region, and this has led to crisis after crisis. And now we are seeing another economic crisis because, of course, of the involvement of extra-regional states, though it may not be solely because of them, but they have also provided a significant problem to the situation. So the lack of the willingness to really look inwards is the problem. So this is something that needs to be addressed, and hopefully with the right coordination, this can be addressed in the long term. But for now, the situation still seems pretty grim because of the geopolitical configurations of the Indo-Pacific.
Yeah, next question. Come on, be quick. Yes, be quick. Don't detain the guest for a very long time. He's a busy person. I mean, going to various platforms. And I hope.
So can I ask another question, one last one?
Yeah. Go on.
Sir, another question of mine is that the former US Secretary of State, Henry Kissinger, in his book, The World Order, has pointed out that the Westphalian nation state system is by its very nature a multipolar system, and it has structurally been known to invite a countervailing form of action whenever the international system tilts towards hegemony, so over multipolarity. So can we say that when the pre-existing geopolitical system where US is the major player, now when China is countering US hegemony, we can actually find solace in Thucydides' words that wars are inevitable between an emerging power and a superpower? Or can we say that it is towards the benefit of the entire humanity?
Thank you. And that is a very relevant question. And in fact, it is very interesting. We have to understand that, the Kissinger and other structural realists, for that matter, tend to look into the role of the material concept of power engaging. Of course, for them, there's also another theory of Organsky regarding the rise and fall of powers as well. So we have to look into that, but they fail to account for the role of perception. So it's not necessary that when a power rises, it seeks to topple down the established power, and then there comes a power competition. I've focused on India's role, for example. As India continues to rise, it would not seek to displace the established order or the established great power, but really work within the system and really pave its own path based on the established order. So I don't think it's a good generalization to say that, when one power rises, the other, it comes into a very mechanical process. I don't think it's like that, because the role of perception is just as important as material power. So if there is a level of multipolarity with like-minded powers that seek to promote the establishment of the established order, and work for development based on transparency, rules, international law, then that is a good thing. But if we see a multipolar area with diverging great power perceptions, then that becomes very problematic for all of us.
Yes, I think the issue has been well explained by you. And now I have a few issues. Now I join my students. Now I'm your student now. And as a student, I would like to have your opinion about two issues. One is US pivot to Asia has been a little shaky. And, sometimes people say that US is not a very reliable partner. Sometimes they are in, sometimes they are out. So this is one of the issues. And secondly, so far as the South Asian countries are concerned, they cannot displease China. They cannot incur the wrath of China. They know what harm China can do to their economy and their situation. But the problem is the Southeast Asian countries, they are trying to balance their ties with India as well as with China. And there are certain issues that on which they've been successful. And China's strategy has always been to weaken this unity of South Asian countries. People say China is trying to buy each country individually by giving concessions and all that. So these are the two issues I would like to have your vision. US pivot to Asia, and why it is so shaky now. They are returning, and during Obama's time they say no, and now they say yes. So it creates a problem for the Asian countries. How reliable they can treat US. And secondly, about how their South Asian countries are trying to balance their relations between China and India.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Gore. And in fact, I completely agree with you. With the first question, very briefly, the United States is facing an image crisis in Asia, not only in Asia, but in the developing world, Latin America, Africa, and even in the Pacific Islands, as we can see. It is barely clinging on to the influence that it had in the post-Second World War. This is because of two particular factors that I feel. One is the limit in terms of its resources, which has been on decline since the 1970s. And the second is its preoccupation elsewhere. Various governments have tried to reassure Asia of the US's presence, but slowly by slowly, they could see that the US is not really committed. As we can see, after 9/11, President Bush shifted to the Middle East, and then President Obama came, and he did the pivot to Asia, realizing that China is really 10 steps ahead of the game in Asia. But still, he was all again preoccupied in Europe. And then Trump came. That was short-lived as well. And then Biden is now again preoccupied in Eastern Europe. So really, the US's failure to really see China as a more serious threat than Russia is concerning, because China is 10 times bigger than Russia in terms of economy. It is, in fact, has global ambitions compared to Russia's regional interests. So, and in fact, it was the US's initiative to really empower China to make it as powerful as it is today in the early stages. So, and then now they sort of are looking to China saying, don't do this. And then they go backtrack. And China sees this as an opportunity to solidify its presence even more. And it likes that because to China, this is a win. Preoccupation equals more influence of China in its immediate neighborhood. So that's an important point. And the second part is that it is true, China's geography in Southeast Asia really constrains the ability of Southeast Asian states to really pick sides. We see the situation in Taiwan. Southeast Asian states were quiet. In fact, they did not want to be part of it. When push comes to shove, when they would have to choose a side, they would definitely side with China because it is with China that their economic jugular veins are held, as you have rightfully mentioned, sir. So it's not a question of choosing anymore. China has, and even the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command has established in 2017 that Southeast Asia, the South China Sea, is completely in China's control. It has the ability to dominate it with power projection, and it can indulge in Taiwan from any side. So this is something that it has that the US is slowly losing. And Southeast Asian countries are aware of that. They would want to maintain peace in the region without provoking the US-China competition.
Yes, you are very correct in your assessment of the situation. This is more realistic assessment of the situation presently. We can't say about the future, what events turn place, and we hope for peace in this area.
Yes.
So
yes.
now I would like to come to a conclusion and close this session. But before that, I would like to thank you who have accepted our invite at a very short notice. I know you are capable of that, and you can very well handle the situation. And we are actually having a proposal of master's course in Indian foreign policy. And these short-term course, master's course devoted exclusively to Indian foreign policy. And
very nice.
This is a preparation for that. This short-term, 2 months course to understand Indian foreign policy.
Yes.
We enroll students from all parts of India, all leading universities, also from Pakistan and Iran. And we are moving towards that. And India is going to have a virtual university here in India. Virtually, the UGC chairman has declared today. And all the online certificate courses, diploma courses, and I propose that master's course to the UGC that they should have such useful courses for Indian students, so that they don't have to fly to US or UK.
That's true. Everything is now virtual, sir. So I think this is the best, the best choice.
So it is a 2-year, 4-semester course. First part of the first year confines to international relations, foreign policy, and diplomacy. All focused on India, Indian diplomacy.
That's perfect.
And secondly, will be the relations with foreign countries. Second year, first semester, it will be India's role in UN and other regional organizations. And the fourth one will be dissertation, internship, and foreign language courses. So this is the proposal that we have worked out. And nobody, I don't know why Indian University didn't think about it. I mean, just there is a question.
Perfect, yeah.
I mean, there is just a paper on Indian foreign policy. We take our own studies on Indian foreign policy very casually. We are more interested in studying. Of course, we are interested in studying international relations with all the countries, whether major or minor, regional or what. But we should focus and try to understand our own foreign policy.
That's
and particularly in an area of era of this social media, where people just cry. I mean, they just write whatever they think is. I mean, there's a popular perception on that. And sometimes the government has to go to the what is there on the social media, particularly India. So I thought that the university students are the best bets. Let them first understand the implications, the making and the implementation of foreign policy, our own foreign policy. And then if they write on social media, they write in such articles on this that will be valuable to understand the issue. and that will be for general public also. So with that end, we are working on that. And I'm thankful to, I mean, people like you, academics, media persons, diplomats, analysts, who have been of great source of strength to us. And you have enlightened our students to a great extent. This is not a classroom teaching. I tell you, this is not a classroom teaching. This is something in addition to that. So that
That's
you are
true.
enlightened and you have a perspective from the people who have studied, who have researched, who have contributed to the subject. So with that and I think in view, I thought of you, and I think you were the best person to do
Thank you
it.
so much, sir. Thank you.
So again, thanking you, and just with your permission, I would like to close this session. And
Absolutely, sir. Thank you.
thank you very much.